And now we're going to hear from Shannon Cuniff, the Director of Chemical and Material Risk Management from the Office of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, and Paul Yaroshak. How did I do, Paul? Close, okay. Who's the Deputy Director at the Department of Defense.
Well, thank you. It's truly an honor to be here. Phthalates in baby bottles, lead in children's toys, hormones in your drinking water. These were this year's headlines. And in response, Congress is exploring the reform of the Toxic Substances Control Act, which regulates chemical safety. And they're also pressuring the Environmental Protection Agency to improve the quality and timeliness of their chemical risk assessments. Meanwhile, we find ourselves in a materials revolution with broadening application of engineered nanomaterials, even while their fate and effect is not well understood. 5 years ago, we determined that waiting for a regulatory level to be established for a chemical actually put the Department of Defense at risk. So we decided we needed an ability to forecast and respond early to these environmental, safety, health, and mission risks posed by chemicals, ahead of regulatory requirements, I might add. So we established a program to do just that, and we created what we call our 3-tiered scan, watch, action process. And as a result, in the few years since our program's inception, we have already enhanced human health, environmental protection, and enhanced military readiness. So I'd like to present to you 3 important points about the program. First, why it's innovative. There are many programs, frankly, that can assess the impact of a proposed regulation. What ours does is truly looks over the horizon and looks and assesses the impacts of changing science, like toxicity levels, detection limits, exposure patterns. We scout scientific journals, we look at nonprofit blogs, other leading edge indicators of scientific information about chemicals. We even look at media reports to get a sense on attitudinal shifts about chemicals. We look over the horizon because risk management needs to be done well in advance of regulation. For example, it can take well over a decade, sometimes 2 decades, in order to find and prove out that a substitute material is feasible for an application on a jet fighter. Second, we're driven to make continual improvements, particularly to our assessment and our communication processes. Last year, we developed a multi-attribute ranking system, which basically allowed us to better evaluate and rack and stack the different risk management measures that were in front of us. This year, we deployed a group decision software program that enabled us to do real-time analysis of the subject matter experts that participate in our mission impact assessments. So now what we could do is see each expert's level of confidence in their answer, as well as the group distribution, and we could perform sensitivity analyses. Now, because the program is new and unique, it's especially important that we have effective risk communication, because we have to ensure both the enterprise buys into the risk assessment that we make, in other words, what are the mission risks, as well as being willing to invest in the risk management options that we'd be presenting to them. So our active outreach program includes handout materials, interactive websites, both for the layperson and the technical expert, participation at national fora, interface with industry. And we'd like to expand those efforts, possibly with an international forum. Now, third, and most important, we're producing results. We have screened 247 chemicals already. We've completed assessments on 21 that are of particular interest to the Department of Defense. Our innovative approach is working. Last month, for example, we issued a groundbreaking policy where we directed the use of hexavalent chrome. This was the subject in the Aaron Brockovich film in 2000. And that policy shifts the paradigm and basically states for the Department of Defense a preference for using a suitable substitute. So first the substitute has to be looked at. Another example is naphthalene. Naphthalene comprises 3% of fuels. And fuels are DoD's #1 workforce exposure risk. So when we heard about a new study on naphthalene that indicated cancer risks, we developed initiated a dosimeter we initiated a project to develop a dosimeter technology that could accurately and selectively evaluate and predict real time our workforce exposure to that chemical. To manage nanomaterial risks, we issued, in fact, we were the first federal agency to issue a policy on nanomaterials about treating them as hazardous materials in the workplace. So our influence actually extends far beyond DoD. The EPA and the Environmental Council of States have endorsed our definition of emerging contaminants as well as processes for dealing with them. A number of companies are now using the scan and watch list that we've developed, and we just learned that the German military is going to be sending one of their staff to work with us for a whole year starting in August.
Congratulations.
So in summary, our program integrates policy, science, and technology to reduce the life cycle costs for DoD and make our industrial practices more sustainable. Through our disciplined and collaborative scan, watch, action process, we've developed compelling business cases and have won broad support. Our continuing challenge is to convince those of the need to mitigate future impacts when they have very real crises today. But we believe that crisis isn't the way to approach these problems. We need to plan ahead, and that's what we make happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. I know we have two questions, Ellen and Carl.
So I'm trying to imagine the reaction of other federal agencies when you put a particular chemical or substance on your risk list, and that does it increase the liability then for other federal agencies who continue to use that substance?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to answer that. First of all, the public health agencies support it. Often they already know that they're doing the science, they're thinking about the risk, but they haven't been able to move their own bureaucratic machinery. So they see us as taking a proactive response. Other federal agencies that have a large industrial complex the way DoD does, like DOE or NASA, will also takes a look at our chemicals. So they have not responded negatively. They've actually looked and said, well, how can we work with you on this?
Thank you.
In fact, I would add, I think that we're doing them somewhat of a favor because we're giving them a very early indication of risks, which is exactly what we want to do and get ahead of the game rather than wait till later till there's a problem.
But if they don't, you respond. If they don't respond, aren't they putting themselves in a risky legal position?
Well, I think that they're somewhat protected by the fact that there may not be a regulatory level established.
Exactly. This is well ahead of that.
I have a similar question. What I find most impressive about what you're doing, and it's very impressive, is that the primary mission of the Department of Defense obviously is not environmental protection, and the implications of this for other businesses and governmental entities whose primary mission is not environmental protection is potentially profound. And I'm particularly interested in how you see this being replicated. You touched on it, but being replicated in the private sector and the business community. And do you think that this over-the-horizon look will ultimately result in a sort of advanced environmental protection or sort of mandate on the private sector that we don't have today?
Well, I think that you see a lot of companies already establishing a greener outlook and looking at sustainable chemical processes because they've had to deal with questions of liability. They see their own costs and workforce protection and whatnot. And so companies actually have not only used our scan, watch, action, or the list that we develop out of our process, they're working with us to figure out, well, what chemicals ought they to take out of their systems. So I think what you see is sort of a mutual relationship where they're interested in getting rid of some of these chemicals and we are as well. So they're interested in adopting these. It's the short answer, sorry. And there was another part to your question, I'm sorry.
Do you see this ultimately emerging as some sort of mandated system, or do you see it remaining, in essence, a voluntarily embraced look?
I see it as voluntary. However, we do develop policies that can have, for one chemical like hexavalent chrome, a mandatory component to it. Because basically what we're saying to industry is, don't come at us with this proposal with hexavalent chrome in it, because we want to know if you've looked at a substitute first.
Excuse me. I'm actually, to go back, and you may have answered this already. There are a lot of chemicals you work with, right? What is your process for figuring out this might be a dangerous chemical? How long does it take you to figure out that this is dangerous? I mean, this is just my ignorance trying to figure out how you determine. And when you say dangerous, dangerous to whom and in what quantities, et cetera? I mean, all of that is, I take it, a process. I don't know, do you have a process for that?
Well, first let me correct a slight misperception.
Okay.
They're not always dangerous chemicals.
Okay.
Okay?
Right. You have to, so how do you decide which chemical? That's a good way to think about it.
We're looking at changes and trends that a chemical that, let's say, might become regulated or might even because of voluntary efforts be phased out, and what impact does that have on the DoD mission? So sulfur hexafluoride.
So there are two kind of categories. One that you see when you're looking down the line, this one might be regulated, we should pay attention.
Right. So SF6 is the one I was just about to give,
Yeah,
is a greenhouse gas. A couple of years ago, we looked at it, and you could see what was going on in greenhouse gases, and we said, let's take a look at what this chemical, do we use it? Does it matter? And sure enough, it turns out DoD uses it in some rather unique military applications. And so we said, look, chances are this is going to get regulated through some scheme or another with climate change. I mean, there was certainly a growing sense that way. And so we started the machinery inside to say, where are we using it? Can we find a substitute? How do we need to approach this regulation in the future?
The point of all that is it's many years before regulatory activity. And I do think, to answer your question, I do think there is a paradigm shift here. We've caused a paradigm shift within DoD, where it was compliance-oriented. We'll wait till there's a regulation and we'll comply. We've turned that on its head, really, where we're looking years ahead and doing things that are socially responsible years ahead of time.
I know your time is up, but Ed has a question, and I have one more question. As chair, I get to ask.
You're dealing with a very complicated, large enterprise, the Defense Department, with thousands of contractors. At what point can you communicate with a contractor to let the contractor know that an agent that is planned to be used in a new technology is not going to be usable? Or do you have that authority?
Well, I don't have the authority to tell them they cannot use it. But what we do is we have these these action and watch lists that we put out on our website, and we do active outreach. We also work with a number of organizations like the Aerospace Industry Association, so they can reach out. They have an awareness of what we're interested in. We worked with the organization called NAME, the National Association, used to be called the National Association for Environmental Management, worked cooperatively with them and their constituents to get this information out and work at ways to keep these lines of communication open.
I see that you're the director of chemical material risk management. So was this your initiative, or was this, yes, you somehow said, I'm going to do this,
well,
the two of you?
Largely so, yes. I was hired by DoD 5 years ago to deal with one particular chemical problem that they were facing. And the charge given to me was, make sure this doesn't happen again. So we conceived the program, and it took off from there.
Thank you. Well, that was very impressive. Well